Righto, here we go again. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to explain to you why. The next thing down from FOST is moderate. And what moderate rods are generally used for is moving baits. So crank baits, jerk baits, top water baits, spinner baits, bladed jigs, vibrating jigs. And what that means is the rod action from further down the rod, say the fourth or fifth or sixth guide even from the tip, the rod is more parabolic. Now this is an extra fast rod, so it's not gonna show you what parabolic means to a T, but that's parabolic. Parabolic is the bend of the rod, the curve of the rod. So a moderate rod or a parabolic rod bends more from the center of the rod. A fast rod bends closer to the tip, and an extra fast rod is from the tip down to about the third eye, and it is super sensitive. The reason why you would want to use a moderate rod for moving baits is when you are fishing a moving bait and the fish hits the bait, they normally turn their head, or I call it tear away. And when you're using a fast rod or a stiff rod, when you set the hook, it will pull the bait away from the fish. Whereas with a moderate or a parabolic rod, when you set the hook, the rod will bend, allowing the fish to turn if it wants to turn. And it acts more like a shock absorber, absorbing that shock of the fish trying to tear away. And that's why you would use a moderate rod for moving baits. How does that apply to our 7-foot medium heavy rod that we've discussed? Well, a stock standard 7-foot medium heavy rod is an all-round rod. It's a little bit fast, it's a little bit moderate. You could literally fish, other than the very more finesse techniques, you could literally fish any bait on a 7-foot medium heavy rod. A moving bait, a soft plastic bait, a jig, a spinner bait, all of those baits would work on there. The only thing that would probably be a little bit more difficult is when you're throwing lighter baits, and we'll get into that as well. Why are different rods different prices? That's an easy one. It's the materials that they're made of. So when a rod is created, there's a lot of different components in the rod. The material that most rods are made of these days is either graphite, carbon, boron, or e-glass, which is like a fiberglass, or a combination of all of those. They have a measurement which we're not going to get into, but the higher that measurement goes, the lighter the rod becomes, the more sensitive the rod becomes, and the more expensive the rod becomes. The components on the rod will also add to the price of the rod. And there's hundreds of different component manufacturers around the world. And if you have spent any time online or in a tackle shop, you will know some of those component manufacturers, and we're not going to talk about them. As we said at the beginning of this video, particularly rods and reels are very personal choices. I can advise what rods to start with when we're talking about general fishing. As we get more and more into the techniques, I will advise what rod to use for those general techniques. But the thing that you guys have to understand, and you've got to understand it from the outset, there's going to be certain scenarios when we talk about the different techniques and styles of fishing, different lures, that certain rods cannot do. And bass fishing, that's what one of the things I find so exciting about bass fishing is that there are hundreds of different techniques And then there's techniques within the techniques that guys come up with and companies come up with, and thousands of different types of lures. This sport, it's like a disease. And once you start buying tackle, you cannot stop. So much so that I started my own tackle company because I just want to make everything. I see something, I see another one that's the same as that something, I want to make that something better. That's how my company started. I like this color, I like that color, that guy in that state or province likes that color, it works better at that. You've got to have all of them. You don't. You do, but you don't. And it's the same with rods. When you find a brand of rod that you like, unless you find something that is exponentially better than that specific brand of rod that you like, you will probably stay with that brand for a long time. And a lot of that has got to do with the blank that the rod is built on. This is the blank, the stick part of the rod. The reason why there are so many different rod companies today is that they all have different ways of making their blanks to be more sensitive, to be more rugged, to stand up to getting hammered. What we're looking for as our first bass rod is a rod that can take a bit of a beating, because when you are learning to cast, you're going to beat the rod a little bit. Once you become more comfortable with your casting, you will be more careful with your rods. But initially, that is not what we need. When you're learning to cast, you don't need to be worried about the rod and the reel and the line and the lure. We're learning to cast. If you go out straight away and buy a top of the range rod, the most expensive rod, the best rod, and you on your first swing, you hit a branch behind you and it snaps the rod, or you hit the console of the boat on your first swing and the rod smashes, it's pointless. What I recommend that you do is to go out, buy a good middle of the range rod, 7-foot medium heavy, either spinning or casting, as we've discussed, and put in your time learning to cast. You will understand when you go from a medium heavy rod to a medium or a heavy or an extra heavy, whatever the case is. When you pick up the rod and you cast with it, you'll understand it straight away. I always say to people when they say, what rod should I buy? How do you know what brand of rod to buy? With your first rod, I don't think the brand is important. When you're going to buy your first spinning rod, what you're going to look for is something that you can do most things with to start out before you decide what techniques you actually want to focus on in your personal fishing. What I suggest to most people when they go in and buy their first spinning rod, and casting rod for that matter, but spinning rod specifically now, a rod around about 7 foot, medium heavy, we'll talk about that now, and something which feels good in your hand. Now, that sounds like a very strange thing to say, but when you pick up a rod and put it in your hand, don't ever try to buy a rod without putting a reel on it. You will not know if a rod is going to suit you unless there is a reel on it. So if you walk into a tackle shop and you see 4 or 5 rods that you like, speak to the assistant there and say to him, can you just bring me a reel that I can try it on these rods? If the assistant says no, leave the shop and go to a different shop, because then they don't care about you. Buying rods online is slightly more difficult, but if you follow the few things that we're going to discuss today, it's easy. I think you should buy a good middle of the range rod stick a reel on it, get out there. You're going to waste a lot of line when you're learning how to cast. We'll get into that as well. And just cast and cast and cast until you become comfortable with that rod. Try different lures, different weights, until you start to feel. And it sounds like black magic now, but you will start to feel when you're casting what rods go with what lures, how that lure suits that rod, how the rod loads when you're casting with it with different weights of lure. And you'll see it in the distances. Now, it's easier to get distance with a spinning rod than it is with a casting rod initially when you're learning how to cast. That's why I always recommend that people start with spinning rods. However, if you are like me and you don't like spinning rods, and I do not personally like spinning rods, you will start with a casting reel. We're going to do some videos in a couple of months' time about how to set up and use the different types of reels. We're going to do that on the water. More about that later. That's exciting things that are coming. But for those of you that want to get out and do it now, here's what I suggest. Go out, buy a middle of the range 7-foot medium heavy rod, either casting or spinning, it's your preference. Buy a middle of the range reel, casting or spinning, it's your preference. Load it up with 14-pound monofilament line. Do not use fluorocarbon or braid when you're learning to cast. If you already know how to cast, different story. But when you are learning to cast, put some 14-pound monofilament line on there. Just normal, bog standard, cheap line. Because you're going to mess it up. You're going to get knots in your line. You're going to get overwinds on your reel, particularly if you decide to go with a casting reel. And get out there, put on I recommend that you start with a sinker, a 3/8 ounce sinker. Just tie it onto the line, get out to the water, and start throwing with it until you get, and then progressively lesser and lesser and lesser weight. 3/8 ounce, that's about middle of the road for most types of lure applications which are in bass fishing. If there is a lure that's made for bass fishing, generally speaking, you'll find it in 3/8 ounce. Just put a 3/8 ounce sinker on, thread the line through the eyes or guides, tie the sinker onto the end of the line, and fire it out there until you become confident. The feel of the weight of the sinker on the rod, and once you are confident casting the 3/8 ounce sinker, go the next weight down. Then you go down to a 1/4 ounce, and then you go down to an 1/8 ounce until you're confident. You will see when you start reducing the weight on a spinning rod and a casting rod how the distances differ. On a spinning rod, you will initially get a lot more distance than you will on a casting when you're learning to cast with a casting rod. When we start getting into specific techniques, I will explain why I feel that there's a place for a spinning rod and a place for a casting rod in your arsenal of rods that you're going to have eventually. And again, guys, I'm going to stress this point. Most of us will not be happy with just one rod. And as we start getting into the techniques and the different types of lures, you'll understand why I say that. There are more different types of markings that you will find on rods with regard to the power of the rods, the heavy, the medium heavy, the ultralight, the mid, whatever the case might be. I am unsure why rod builders feel the need to change things. To me, as someone that has built rods and that has also designed rods for the commercial market, it baffles me. I don't know if they are trying to stand apart from other brands or whatever the case is. And I'm going to go through it briefly, and I don't want you to be intimidated by it, because for your first rod, it's probably not going to affect it. And what you might find in the same place, instead of it saying medium heavy, it might say it's a 3 power, or it's a 4 power, or a 5 power. So the way that you can work out how that is similar or different to the way that we've just gone through it now is the lowest number will be a light or an ultralight, and the highest number is going to be an extra heavy or an extra heavy, or whatever the case might be. What you're shooting for, if that is a rod that you are going to buy that has that power number instead of medium heavy on it, for a 7-foot medium heavy, you're looking at 7-foot 4 power. That's all you need to know about that for now. When we get into advanced stuff, which is a long way down the line, we'll start talking about that type of thing. But for now, guys, I can't stress it enough. 7-foot medium heavy, get out there, start learning how to cast, start getting used to the feel of the rod in your hand, start getting used to maybe what it feels like when you get a bite on that particular rod. And as we go down and we speak about the different techniques, we'll talk about why you need rods that are more or less sensitive. I know that this sounds a little bit daunting with the stuff that we've gone through today. Don't be intimidated by it. As we go along, you'll understand why you need different rods for different things. So what I'm going to do is, in the description below, I'm going to leave some links, and you guys can go and have a look at some rods that I recommend as starter rods, both spinning and casting. And some exciting news for me in particular is I have got permission from the Guggen Squad to direct you to their website with direct links with tackle that you guys can have a look at going forward. I'm not affiliated to them in any way at the moment, but you never know. Along the line, what could happen? I hope that we can do some things together. Thanks, Mr. Rackley, for that, by the way. I appreciate you answering my emails. I appreciate you all tuning in. I hope this has helped a little bit with the confusion of buying rods. I'll see you all next time.